Hi, welcome back to Weird Worlds. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. The Black Master is a supernatural mystery set in a world haunted by ancient evil. Dr. Jules de Grandin investigates a malevolent force resurrected from the past. Themes of vengeance and the clash between life and death unfold as the characters face a dangerous, otherworldly threat. The Black Master by Seabury Quinn. Weird Tales, January 1929. Jules de Grandin poured a thimbleful of Boulogne cognac into a wide-mouthed glass and passed the goblet back and forth beneath his nose with a waving motion, inhaling the rich, fruity fumes from the amber fluid. "Eh bien, young monsieur," he informed our visitor as he drained the liqueur with a slow, appreciative swallow and set the empty glass on the tabouret with a scarcely suppressed smack of his lips. "This is of interest. Pirate treasure, you do say? Parbleu, c'est presque irresistible. Tell us more, if you please." Eric Balderson looked from the little Frenchman to me with a half-diffident, deprecating smile. "There really isn't much to tell," he confessed, "and I'm not at all sure I'm not the victim of a pipe dream after all. You knew father pretty well, didn't you, Dr. Trowbridge?" He turned appealingly to me. "Yes," I answered. "He and I were at Amherst together. He was an extremely level-headed sort of chap, too, not at all given to daydreaming, and that's what I'm pinning my faith on," Eric broke in. "Coming from anyone but Dad, the story would be too utterly fantastic to—" "Mordieu, yes, monsieur," de Grandin interrupted testily. "We do concede your so excellent pair was the ultimate word in discretion and sound judgment, but will you, for the love of kindly heaven, have the goodness to tell us all, and let us judge for ourselves the value of the communication of which you speak?" Eric regarded him with the slow grin he inherited from his father, then continued, quite unruffled. "Dad wasn't exactly what you'd call credulous, but he seemed to put considerable stock in the story, judging from his diary. Here it is." From the inside pocket of his dinner coat, he produced a small book bound in red leather and handed it to me. "Read the passages I've marked, will you please, Doctor?" he asked. "I'm afraid I'd fill up if I tried to read Dad's writing aloud. He hasn't been gone very long, you know." Adjusting my pince-nez, I hitched a bit nearer the library lamp and looked over the age-yellowed sheets covered with the fine, angular script of my old classmate. "November 8th, 1898. Old Robinson is going fast. When I called to see him at the Seaman's snug harbour this morning, I found him considerably weaker than he had been yesterday, though still in full possession of his faculties. There's nothing specifically wrong with the old fellow, save as any worn-out bit of machinery in time gets ready for the scrap heap. He will probably go out sometime during the night, quite likely in his sleep, a victim of having lived too long. Doctor," he said to me when I went into his room this morning, "you've been mighty good to me, a poor, worn-out old hulk with never a cent to repay all your kindness. But I've that here which will make your everlasting fortune, providin' you're brave enough to tackle it." "That's very kind of you, John," I answered, but the old fellow was deadly serious. "'Tis no laughin' matter, Doctor," he returned as he saw me smile. "'Tis the truth I'm tellin', and if I hadn't gone at it myself, I'd not be tellin' it. 'Tis seafarin' men don't hold with disturbin' the bones of the dead. But you, bein' a landsman, and a doctor to boot, would most likely succeed where others have failed. I had it from my grandther, sir, and he was an old man, and I but a lad when he gave it to me, so ye can see 'tis no new thing I'm passin' on. Where he got it I don't know, but he guarded it like his eyes and would never talk about it, not even to me after he'd give it to me. With that he asked me to go to his ditty box and take out a packet done up in oiled silk, which he insisted I take as partial compensation for all I'd done for him. I tried to tell him the home paid my fee regularly, and that he was beholden to me for nothing, but he would not have it, so to quiet the old man, I took the plan for my everlasting fortune before I left. 9th of November, 1898. Old John died last night, as I'd predicted, and probably went with the satisfied feeling that he had made a potential millionaire of the struggling country practitioner who tended him in his last illness. I must look into the mysterious packet by which he set such store. Probably it's a chart for locating some long-sunk pirate ship, or unburying the loot of Captain Kidd Blackbeard or some other old sea robber. Sailormen, a generation ago, were full of such yarns, and recounted them so often they actually came to believe them. 10th of November, 1898. I was right in my surmise concerning old John's legacy, though it's rather different from the usual run of buried treasure maps. Some day, when I've nothing else to do, I may go down to the old church in Harrisonville and actually have a try at the thing. It would be odd if poor Eric Balderson, struggling country practitioner, became a wealthy man overnight. What would I do first? Would a sealskin dolman for Astrid or a new sidebar buggy for me be the first purchase I'd make? I wonder. I remarked as I put down the book. And this old seaman's legacy, as your father called it, is here, Eric interrupted, handing me a square of ancient crackling vellum on which a message of some kind had been laboriously scratched. The edges of the parchment were badly frayed, as though with much handling, though the indentures might have been the result of hasty tearing in the olden days. At any rate, it was a tattered and thoroughly decrepit sheet from which I read, "In ye name of ye most holy Trinity, I, Richard Thompson, being a right sinful man, and near unto mine ende, do give greeting and warning to whoso shall read herefrom. The booty which my master, whose name no man did rightly know, but who was surnamed by some the Black Master, and by some Blackface the Merciless, lies hidden in divers places. But the cream thereof is laid away in the churchyard of St. Davides, hard by Harrison's village. There, by day and by night, do the dead stand guard over it, for the master sealed its hiding place both with cement and with a curse, which he fondly swore should be on them, and on their children, who violated the sepulchre without his sanction. Yet if any there be who dare defy the curse, as I should not of him who had neither pity nor mercy nor loving kindness at all, let him go unto the burying ground at dead of night, at the season of dies natalis invicti, and obey the direction. Further hint I dare not give, for fear of him who lurks beyond the portals of life, to hold to account such of his servants as preceded him not in death. And of your charity, ye who read this, I do charge and conjure ye, that ye make good and pious use of the Master's treasure, and that ye expend such part of the same as may be fitting for masses for the good estate of Richard Thompson, a sinful man dying in terror of his many iniquities and of the tongueless one who waits him across the borderline. When the star shines from the tree, be it as a sign to ye, draw ye 14-cubit line, to the entrance unto life, whence across the graveyard sod, see spot cursed by man and God." "It looks like a lot of childish nonsense to me," I remarked with an impatient shrug as I tossed the parchment to de Grandin. Those old fellows who had keys to buried treasure were everlastingly taking such care to obscure their meaning in a lot of senseless balderdash that no one can tell when they're serious and when they're perpetrating a hoax. "If, Cordicu," the little Frenchman whispered softly, examining the sheet of frayed vellum with wide eyes, holding it up to the lamplight, then crackling it softly between his fingers. "Is it possible? But yes, it must be. Jules de Grandin could not be mistaken." "Whatever are you maundering about?" I interrupted impatiently. "The way you're looking at that parchment, anyone would think—" "Whatever anyone would think, he would be far from the truth," de Grandin cut in, regarding us with the fixed, unwinking stare which meant deadly seriousness. "If this plat be a mauvaise plaisanterie, how do you call it? The practical joke? It is a very grim one indeed, for the parchment on which it is engraved is human skin." "What?" cried Eric and I in chorus. "Nothing less," de Grandin responded. "Me, I have seen such parchments in the Paris Musée, I have handled them, I have touched them. I could not be mistaken. Such things were done in the olden days, my friends. I think perhaps we should do well to investigate this business. Men do not set down confessions of a sinful life and implore the possible finders of treasure to buy masses for their souls on human hide when they would indulge in pleasantries. No, it is not so. But, I began, when he shut me off with a quick gesture, in the churchyard of St. David's this repentant Monsieur Richard Thompson did say, "May I inquire, friend Trowbridge, if there be such a church in the neighbourhood?" Assuredly there was once, for does he not say, hard by Harrison's village, and might that not have been the early designation of your present city of Harrisonville? Why yes, by George, I exclaimed. You're right, de Grandin. There is a St. David's church down in the old East End. A colonial parish too, one of the first English churches built after the British took Jersey over from the Dutch. Harrisonville was something of a seaport in those days, and there was a bad reef a few miles offshore. I've been told the church was built and endowed with the funds derived from salvaging cargo from ships stranded on the reef. The parish dates back to 1670 or 71, I believe. De Grandin extracted a vile-smelling French cigarette from his black leather case, applied a match to it and puffed furiously a moment, then slowly expelled a twin column of smoke from his nostrils. And Dies Natalis Invicti, our so scholarly Monsieur Richard wrote as the time for visiting this churchyard. What can that be but the time of Bonhomme Noël, the Christmas season? Parbleu, my friends, I think perhaps we shall go to that churchyard and acquire a most excellent Christmas gift for ourselves. Tonight is December 22. Tomorrow should be near enough for us to begin our quest. We meet here tomorrow night to try our fortune, n'est-ce pas? Crazy and harebrained as the scheme sounded, both Eric and I were carried away by the little Frenchman's enthusiasm and nodded vigorous agreement. Bon, he cried. Très bon. One more drink, my friends, then let us go dream of the golden wheat awaiting our harvesting. But see here, Dr. de Grandin, Eric Balderson remarked, since you've told us what this message is written on, this business looks more serious to me. Suppose there's really something in this curse old Thompson speaks of. We won't be doing ourselves much service by ignoring it, will we? Ah bah, returned the little Frenchman above the rim of his half-drained glass. A curse, you do say? Young monsieur, I can plainly perceive you do not know Jules de Grandin. A worm-eaten fig for the curse. Me, I can curse as hard and as violently as any villainous old sea robber who ever sank a ship or slit a throat. The bleak December wind, which had been moaning like a discontented banshee all afternoon, had brought its threatened freight of snow about 9 o'clock. The factory and warehouse-lined thoroughfares of the unfashionable part of town, where old St. David's Church stood, were noiseless and white as ghost streets in a dead city when de Grandin, Eric Balderson, and I approached the churchyard Pentis shortly before midnight the following night. The hurrying flakes had stopped before we left the house, however, and through the wind-driven pluvial clouds, the chalk-white winter moon and a few stars shone frostily. Gordieu, I might have guessed as much, de Grandin exclaimed in exasperation, as he tried the iron grille stopping the entrance to the church's little close and turned away disgustedly. Locked fast as the gates of hell against escaping sinners, my friends, he announced. It would seem we must swarm over the walls and get a charge of buckshot in us when the caretaker sees us. Eric interrupted gloomily. No fear, mon vieux, de Grandin returned with a quick grin. Me, I have not been idle this day. I did come here to reconnoitre during the afternoon, morbleu, but I did effect the devotion at evensong before I stepped outside to survey the terrain, and many things I discovered. First, this church stands like a lonely outpost in a land whence the expeditionary force has been withdrawn. Around here are not half a dozen families enrolled on the parish register, were it not for churchly pride and the fact that heavy endowments of the past make it possible to support this chapel as a mission. It would have been closed long ago. There is no resident sexton, no curate in residence here. Both functionaries dwell some little distance away. As for the cemetery, no interments have been permitted here for close on 50 years. The danger of grave robbers is nil, so also is the danger of our finding a night watchman. Come, let us mount the wall. It was no difficult feat scaling the 6-foot stone barricade surrounding St. David's Little God's Acre, and we were standing ankle-deep in fresh snow within 5 minutes, bending our heads against the howling midwinter blast and casting about for some starting point in our search. Sinking to his knees in the lee of an ancient holly tree, de Grandin drew out his pocket electric torch and scanned the copy of Richard Thompson's cryptic directions. He murmured as he flattened the paper against the bare ground beneath the tree's outspread, spiked branches. What is it the estimable Monsieur Thompson says in his so execrable poetry? When the star shines from the tree, name of 300 demented green monkeys, when does a star shine from a tree, friend Trowbridge? Maybe he meant a Christmas tree, I responded with a weak attempt at flippancy, but the little Frenchman was quick to adopt the suggestion. Morbleu, I think you have it right, good friend, he agreed with a nod. And what tree is more in the spirit of Noel than the holly? Come, let us take inventory. Slowly, bending his head against the wind, yet thrusting it upward from the fur collar of his greatcoat like a turtle emerging from its shell every few seconds, he proceeded to circle every holly and yew tree in the grounds, observing them first from one angle, then another, going so near that he stood within their shadows, then retreating till he could observe them without withdrawing his chin from his collar. At last, nom d'un singe vert, but I think I have it, he ejaculated. Come and see. Joining him, we gazed upward along the line indicated by his pointing finger. There, like a glass ornament attached to the tip of a Yuletide tree, shone and winked a big bright star, the planet Saturn. So far so good, he murmured, again consulting the cryptogram. Be it as a sign to ye, says our good friend Thompson. Très bien, monsieur. The sign has been heeded now. Draw ye 14-cubit line, about 252 of your English inches, or, let us say, 21 feet, he muttered. 21 feet, yes, but which way? To the entrance unto life. What is the entrance to life in a burying ground par le mode d'un chat noir? Perhaps yes, why not? As he glanced quickly this way and that, his eyes came to rest on a slender stone column, perhaps 3 feet high, topped by a wide, bowl-like capital. Running through the snow to the monument, de Grandin brushed the clinging flakes from the bowl's lip and played the beam of his flashlight on it. You see? He asked with a delighted laugh. Running in a circle about the weathered stone was the inscription, Sancti Vis, Sanctus, Sanctus. Unless a man be born again of water, ye Holy Spirit he shall in no wise. The rest of the lettering had withered away with the alternate frosts and thaws of more than 200 winters. Why, of course, I exclaimed with a nod of understanding. A baptismal font, the entrance to life. My friend, de Grandin assured me solemnly, there are times when I do not entirely despair of your intellect, but where shall we find that cursed spot of which, monsieur? Look, look, for God's sake, croaked Eric Balderson, grasping my arm in his powerful hand till I winced under the pressure. Look there, Dr. Trowbridge, it's opening. The moon, momentarily released from a fetter of drifting clouds, shot her silver shafts down to the clutter of century-old monuments in the churchyard, and, 20 feet or so from us, stood one of the old-fashioned box-like grave markers of colonial times. As we looked at it in compliance with Eric's panic-stricken announcement, I saw the stone panel nearest us slowly slide back like a shutter withdrawn by an invisible hand. Saha! It lies this way, then. De Grandin whispered fiercely, his small white teeth fairly chattering with eagerness. Let us go, my friends. Let us investigate. Name of a cockroach, but this is the Bonaventure. No, my friend. He pushed me gently back as I started toward the tomb. Jules de Grandin goes first. It was not without a shudder of repulsion that I followed my little friend through the narrow opening in the tomb, for the air inside the little enclosure was black and terrible, and solid-looking as if formed of ebony. But there was no chance to draw back, for close behind me, almost as excited as the Frenchman, pressed Eric Balderson. The box-like tomb was but the bulkhead above a narrow flight of stone stairs, steep-pitched as a ship's accommodation ladder. I discovered almost as soon as I had crawled inside. With some maneuvering, I managed to turn about in the narrow space and back down the steps. 20 steps, each about 8 inches high, I counted as I descended to find myself in a narrow stone-lined passageway that afforded barely room for us to walk in single file. Marching ahead as imperturbably as though strolling down one of his native boulevards, de Grandin led the way, flashing the ray from his lantern along the smoothly paved passage. At length, "We are arrived, I think," he announced, "and unless I am mistaken, as I hope I am, we are in a cul-de-sac as well." The passage had terminated abruptly in a blank wall, and there was nothing for us to do, apparently, but edge around and retrace our steps. I was about to suggest this when a joyous exclamation from de Grandin halted me. Feeling along the sandstone barrier, he had sunk to his knees, prodded the stone tentatively in several places, and finally come upon a slight indentation, grooved as though to furnish a handhold. "Do you hold the light, friend Trowbridge?" he directed, as he thrust the ferrule of his ebony cane into the depression and gave a mighty tug. "Ah, parbleu, it comes. We are not yet at the end of our tape." Resisting only a moment, the apparently solid block of stone had slipped back almost as easily as a well-oiled trap-door, disclosing an opening some 3.5 feet high by 20 inches wide. "The light, my friend, shine the light past me while I investigate," de Grandin breathed, stooping almost double to pass through the low doorway. I bent as far forward as I could and shot the beam of light over his head, and lucky for him it was I did so, for even as his head disappeared through the cleft, he jerked back with an exclamation of dismay. "Ha, villain, would you so?" he rasped, snatching the keen blade from his sword cane and thrusting it through the aperture with quick, venomous stabs. At length, having satisfied himself that no further resistance offered beyond the wall, he sank once more to his bended knees and slipped through the hole. A moment later I heard him calling cheerfully, and, stooping quickly, I followed him, with Eric Balderson, making heavy work of jamming his great bulk through the narrow opening, bringing up the rear. De Grandin pointed dramatically at the wall we had just penetrated. "Morbleu, he was thorough, that one," he remarked, inviting our attention to an odd-looking contrivance decorating the stones. It was a heavy ship's boom, some 6 feet long, pivoted just above its center to the wall, so that it swung back and forth like a gigantic pendulum. Its upper end was secured to a strand of heavily tarred cable and fitted with a deep notch, while to its lower extremity was securely bolted what appeared to be the fluke from an old-fashioned ship's anchor, weighing at least 3 stone, and filed and ground to an axe-like edge. An instant's inspection of the apparatus showed us its simplicity and diabolical ingenuity. It was secured by a brace of wooden triggers in a horizontal position above the little doorway through which we had entered, and the raising of the stone panel acted to withdraw the keepers till only a fraction of their tips supported the boom. Pressure on the sill of the doorway completed the operation and sprung the triggers entirely back, permitting the timber with its sharpened iron tip to swing downward across the opening like a gigantic headsman's axe, its knife-sharp blade sweeping an arc across the doorway's top where the head of anyone entering was bound to be. But for the warning furnished by the beam of light preceding him, and the slowness of the machine's operation after a century or more of inactivity, de Grandin would have been as cleanly decapitated by the descending blade as a convict lashed to the cradle of a guillotine. "But what makes the thing work?" I asked curiously. "I should think that whoever set it in place would have been obliged to spring it when he made his exit. I can't see." "Sst!" The Frenchman cut me off sharply, pointing to the deadly engine. Distinctly, as we listened, came the sound of tarred hawsers straining over pulley wheels, and the iron-shod beam began to rise slowly, once more assuming a horizontal position. I could feel the short hairs at the back of my neck rising in company with the boom as I watched the infernal spectacle. But de Grandin, ever fearless, always curious, wasted no time in speculation. Advancing to the wall, he laid his hand upon the cable, tugging with might and main, but without visible effect on the gradually rising spar. Giving over his effort, he laid his ear to the stones, listened intently for a moment, then turned to us with one of his quick, elfish smiles. He was clever as well as wicked, the old villain who invented this, he informed us. Behold, beyond this wall is some sort of mechanism worked by running water, my friends. When the trigger retaining this death dealer is released, water is also undoubtedly permitted to run from a cask or tank attached to the other end of this rope. When the knife axe has descended and made the unwelcome visitor shorter by a head, the flowing water once more fills the tank, hoists the axe again to its original position, and poof! We are ready to behead the next uninvited guest who arrives. It is clever, yes. I much regret that we have not the time to investigate the mechanism, for I am convinced something similar opens the door through which we entered, perhaps once each year at the season of the ancient Saturnalia. But we did come here to investigate something entirely different, eh, friend Balderson? Recalled to our original purpose, we looked about the chamber. It was almost cubical in shape, perhaps 16 feet long by as many wide, and slightly less in height. Save the devilish engine of destruction at the entrance, the only other fixture was a low, coffin-like block of stone against the farther wall. Examining this, we found it fitted with hand grips at the sides, and 2 or 3 tugs at these heaved the monolith up on end, disclosing a breast-high, narrow doorway into a second chamber, somewhat smaller than the first, and reached by a flight of some 5 or 6 stone steps. Quickly descending these, we found ourselves staring at a long stone sarcophagus, bare of all inscription and ornament, save the grisly emblem of the Jolly Roger, or piratical skull and thigh bones, graven on the lid where ordinarily the nameplate would have rested, and a stick of dry double-forked wood, something like a capital X in shape, which lay transversely across the pirate emblem. "Ah, what have we here?" inquired de Grandin coolly, approaching the coffin and prying at its lid with his cane sword. To my surprise, the top came away with little or no effort on our part, and we stared in fascination at the unfleshed skeleton of a short, thick-set man with enormously long arms and remarkably short, bandy legs. "Queer," I muttered, gazing at the relic of mortality. You'd have thought anyone who went to such trouble about his tomb and its safeguards would have been buried in almost regal raiment, yet this fellow seems to have been laid away naked as the day he was born. This coffin has been almost airtight for goodness knows how many years, and there ought to be some evidence of cerements left, even if the flesh has mouldered away. De Grandin's little blue eyes were shining with a sardonic light, and his small, even teeth were bared beneath the line of his miniature golden moustache as he regarded me. "Naked, unclothed, without fitting cerements, do you say, friend Trowbridge?" he asked, prodding with his sword blade between the skeleton's ribs a moment. He thrust the flashlight into my grip with an impatient gesture and put both hands elbow deep into the charnel box, rummaging and stirring about in the mass of nondescript material on which the skeleton was couched. "What say you to this, and these, and these?" he demanded. My eyes fairly started from my face as the electric torch ray fell on the things which rippled and flashed and sparkled between the little Frenchman's white fingers. There were chains of gold encrusted with rubies and diamonds and greenly glowing emeralds. There were crosses set with amethyst and garnet which any mitred prince of the church might have been proud to wear. There were ear and finger rings with brilliant settings in such profusion that I could not count them, while about the sides of the coffin were piled great stacks of broad gold pieces minted with the effigy of His Most Catholic Majesty of Spain, and little hillocks of unset gems which sparkled and scintillated dazzlingly. Regal raiment, did you say, friend Trowbridge? De Grandin cried, his breath coming fast as he viewed the jewels with ecstasy. Cordieu, where in all the world is there a monarch who takes his last repose on such a royal bed as this? It's real, Balderson breathed unbelievingly. It wasn't a pipe dream after all then. We're rich, men, rich. Oh, Marion, if it only weren't too late. De Grandin matter-of-factly scooped up a double handful of unset gems and deposited them in his overcoat pocket. What use has this old droll for all this wealth? He demanded. Mordieu, we shall find better use for it than bolstering up dead men's bones. Come, my friends, bear a hand with the treasure. It is high time we were leaving this, Trowbridge, my friend. Watch the light. Even as he spoke, I felt the flashlight slipping from my fingers, for something invisible had struck me a numbing blow across the knuckles. The little lantern fell with a faint musical tinkle into the stone coffin beside the grinning skull, and we heard the soft plop as its airless bulb exploded at contact with some article of antique jewelry. Matches, strike a light, someone, pour l'amour de Dieu. De Grandin almost shrieked. It is necessary that we have light to escape from this so abominable place without having our heads decapitated. I felt for my own flashlight, but even as I did so, there was a faint hissing sound, the sputter of a safety match against its box, and the breath of a glowing furnace seemed suddenly to sweep the room, as the heavy, oppressive air was filled with dancing sheets of many-colored flames, and a furious detonation shook the place. As though seized in some giant fist, I felt myself lifted bodily from the floor and hurled with devastating force against the wall, from which I rebounded and fell forward senseless on the stone-paved floor. Trowbridge, Trowbridge, good kind friend, tell us that you survive. I heard de Grandin's tremulous voice calling from what seemed a mile or more away, as I felt the fiery trickle of brandy between my teeth. Eh? Oh, I'm all right, I replied, as I sat up and forced, I guess, the little Frenchman's hip flask from my lips. What in the world happened? Was it? Morbleu, laughed my friend, his spirits already recovered. I thought old bare bones in the coffin yonder had returned from hell and brought his everlasting fires with him. We, my friends, are three great fools, but Jules de Grandin is the greatest. When first I entered this altogether detestable tomb, I thought I smelled the faint odor of escaping illuminating gas, but so great was my curiosity before we forced the coffin, and so monstrous my cupidity afterward, that I dismissed the matter from my mind. Assuredly, there passes close by here some main of the city's gas pipes, and there is a small leak in one of them. The vapor has penetrated the graveyard earth in small quantities and come into this underground chamber. Not strong enough to overpower us, it was nonetheless in sufficient concentration to explode with one great boom when friend Balderson struck his match. Fortunately for us, the doors behind are open, thus providing expansion chambers for the exploding gas. Otherwise, we should have been annihilated altogether. Come, the gas has blown away with its own force, and we have found friend Trowbridge's flashlight. Mordieu, my 10 fingers do itch most infernally to be at the pleasant task of counting this ill-gotten wealth. Scrambling over the cemetery wall was no light task, since each of us had filled his pockets with Spanish gold and jewels until he scaled almost twice his former weight. It was necessary for Balderson and de Grandin to boost me to the wall crest, then for de Grandin to push from below, while I lent a hand from above to help Balderson up. Finally, the pair of us dragged the little Frenchman up after us. Lucky for us, the wind has risen and the snow recommenced, de Grandin congratulated, as we made our way down the deserted street, walking with a rolling gait, like heavy laden ships in a high sea. Within an hour, the snow inside the cemetery will be so drifted that none will know we visited there tonight. Let us hail a taxi, mes amis. I grow weary bearing this great weight of wealth about. Name of a small green rooster, Jules de Grandin exclaimed delightedly, his little blue eyes shining with elation in the light of the library lamp. We are rich, my friends, rich beyond the wildest dreams of Monte Cristo. Me, I shall have a Parisian appartement which shall be the never-ending wonder of all beholders. A villa on the Riviera, a ducal palace in Venice, no less, and grand Dieu, what is that? Above the wailing of the storm wind, half obliterated by the keening blasts, there came to us from the street outside the scream of a woman in mortal terror. Help! Help! Ah! Help! The last desperate appeal was so thin and high with panic horror that we could scarce distinguish it from the skirling of the gale. "Hold fast, courage, we come, we come!" de Grandin shouted as he burst through the front door, cleared the snow-swept porch with a single bound, and raced hatless into the white-swathed street. "Where are you, madame?" he cried, pausing at the curb and looking expectantly up and down the deserted highway. "Call out, we are here!" For another moment, he searched the desolate street with his gaze, then, "Courage!" he cried, vaulting a knee-high drift and rushing toward a dark, huddled object lying in the shifting snow 100 feet or so away. Balderson and I hurried after him, but he had already raised the woman's lolling head in the crook of his elbow and was preparing to administer a stimulant from his ever-ready flask when we arrived. She was a young girl, somewhere between 17 and 20, to judge by her face, neither pretty nor ill-favored, but with the clean, clear complexion of a well-brought-up daughter of lower middle-class people. About her flimsy party dress was draped a cloth coat, wholly inadequate to the chill of the night, trimmed with a collar of nondescript fur. The hat, pushed back from her blonde, bobbed hair, was the sort to be bought for a few dollars at any department store. De Grandin bent above her with all the deference he would have shown a duchess in distress. "What was it, mademoiselle?" he asked solicitously. "You did call for assistance. Did you fall in the snow?" "Yes?" The girl looked at him from big, terrified eyes, swallowed once convulsively, then murmured in a low, hoarse whisper, "His eyes! Those terrible eyes, ah, Jesus! Mercy!" In the midst of a pitiful attempt to sign herself with the cross, her body stiffened suddenly, then went limp in the Frenchman's arms. Her slender bosom fluttered once, twice, then flattened, and her lower jaw fell slowly downward, as if in a half-stifled yawn. Balderson, layman that he was, mistook her senseless, imbecile expression for a bit of ill-timed horseplay and gave a half-amused titter. De Grandin and I, inured to vigils beside the moribund, recognized the trademarks stamped in those glazed, expressionless eyes and that drooping chin. "Ad te, Domine." The Frenchman bent his blond head as he muttered the prayer. Then, "Come, my friends, help me take her up. We must bear her in from the storm, then notify the police. Ha! Something foul has been abroad this night. It were better for him if he runs not crosswise of the path of Jules de Grandin. Pardieu!" Breakfast was a belated meal the next morning, for it was well after 3 o'clock before the coroner's men and police officers had finished their interrogations and taken the poor, maimed clay that once was gay little Kathleen Burke to the morgue for official investigation. The shadow of the tragedy sat with us at the table, and none cared to discuss future joyous plans for squandering the pirate treasure. It was de Grandin who waked us from our gloomy reveries with a half-shouted exclamation. "Nom de nom! Another!" he cried. "Trowbridge, Balderson, my friends, give attention. Hear this item from Le Journal, if you please. 2 girls victims of fiend. Early this morning, the police were informed of 2 inexplicable murders in the streets of Harrisonville. Kathleen Burke, 19, of 17 Bonham Place, was returning from a party at a friend's house when Dr. Trowbridge and de Grandin, of 993 Susquehanna Avenue, heard her screaming for help and rushed out to offer assistance, accompanied by Eric Balderson, their house guest. They found the girl in a dying condition, unable to give any account of her assailant further than to mumble something concerning his eyes. The body was taken to the city morgue for an inquest, which will be held today. Rachel Muller, 2006, of 445 Essex Avenue, a nurse in the operating room at Mercy Hospital, was returning to her home after a term of special night duty a few minutes before 3 a.m. when she was set upon from behind by a masked man wearing a fantastic costume which he described to the police as consisting of a tight-fitting coat, loose, baggy pantaloons and high boots, turned down at the top, and a stocking cap on his head. He seized her by the throat, and she managed to fight free, whereupon he attacked her with a dirk knife, inflicting several wounds of a serious nature. Officer Timothy Dugan heard the woman's outcries and hurried to her rescue, finding her bleeding profusely and in a serious condition. He administered first aid and rang for an ambulance, in which she was removed to Casualty Hospital, where she was unable to give a more detailed description of her attacker. She died at 4:18 this morning. Her assailant escaped. The police, however, claim to be in possession of several reliable clues, and an arrest is promised in the near future. What say you to that, my friends? The Frenchman demanded. Me, I should say we would better consult. Sergeant Costello saw. Nora McGuinness, my household factotum, announced from the breakfast room door as she stood aside to permit the burly, red-haired Irishman to enter. Ah, bonjour, Sergeant, de Grandin greeted with a quick smile. Is it that you come to lay the clues to the assassin of those two unfortunate young women before us? Detective Sergeant Jeremiah Costello's broad, red face went a shade more rubescent as he regarded the diminutive Frenchman with an affectionate grin. Sure, Dr. de Grandin saw. 'Tis yourself as knows when we're handing out the straight goods and when we're peddling the bull, he retorted. Ain't it the same with the Johnny Darms in Paris? Sure it is. Begorry, if we had so much as one little clue, reliable or not, we'd be hugging and kissing ourselves all over the place, so we would. 'Tis for that very reason, and no other, I'm after troubling ye at your breakfast this roamin'. Would you be willing to listen to the case as far as we know it, I dunno? C'est en mon vieux, de Grandin returned, his eyes shining and sparkling with the joy of the born manhunter in the chase. Tell us all that is in your mind, and we may together arrive at some solution. Meantime, may I not make free of Dr. Trowbridge's hospitality to the extent of offering you a cup of coffee? Thanks, sir, don't mind if I do. The detective accepted. It's mortal cold outside today. Now, to begin with, we don't know no more about who committed these here murders, or why he done it, than a hog knows about a holiday, and that's a fact. They tell me at headquarters that the little Burke girl, God rest her soul, said something about the fella's eyes to you before she died, and Nurse Muller raved about the same thing, though she was able to give some little bit of description of him as well. But who the divil would be going around the streets o' nights murdering poor, defenceless young women? It's cases like this as makes policemen into nervous wrecks, Dr. de Grandin saw. Crimes of passion and crimes committed for gain, they're meat and drink to me, saw. I can understand 'em, but it's the divil's own job running down a Johnny who goes about committing murders like this. Sure, 'tis almost always the sign of a loose screw in his steering gear, saw. And who knows where to look for him? He might be some tough mug, but 'tisn't likely. More apt to be some soft-handed gentleman living in a fine neighbourhood and mingling with the best society. There's some queer goings-on among the swells, Soren, that's gospel, but we can't go up to every bird that acts funny at times and say, come with me. Young fella, me lad, it's wanted for the murder of Kathleen Burke and Rachel Muller ye are, now can we? Hélas non, the Frenchman agreed sympathetically, but have you no clue of any sort to the identity of this foul miscreant? Well, sir, since ye mention it, we have one little thing, the sergeant replied, delving into his inside pocket and bringing forth a folded bit of paper from which he extracted a shred of twisted yarn. Would this be meaning anything to ye? He asked as he handed it to de Grandin. The little Frenchman murmured thoughtfully as he examined the object carefully. Perhaps I cannot say at once. Where did you come by this? 'Twas clutched in Nurse Muller's hand as tight as bedamned when they brought her to the hospital, sir, the detective replied. We're not sure 'twas from the murderer's fancy dress costume, of course, but it's better than nothing to go on. But yes, most certainly, de Grandin agreed as he rose and took the find to the surgery. For a few minutes he was busily engaged with a jeweler's loupe and microscope. Finally, he returned with a shred of yarn partly unraveled at one end. "It would seem," he declared as he returned the evidence to Costello, "that this is of Turkish manufacture, though not recent. It is a high grade of Angora wool. The outer scales have smooth edges, which signifies the quality of the fleece. Also, interwoven with the thread is a fine golden wire. I have seen such yarn, the wool cunningly intermixed with golden threads used for tarbouch tassels of wealthy Moslems. But the style has not prevailed for 100 years and more. This is either a very old bit of wool or a cunning simulation of the olden style. I am inclined to think the former. After all, though, this thread tells little more than that the slayer perhaps wore the headgear of a Mohammedan. The nurse described him as wearing a stocking cap or toboggan, I believe. In her excitement, and in the uncertain light of early morning, a fez might easily be mistaken for such a piece of headgear. "Then we're no better off than we were at first?" the Irishman asked disappointedly. "A little," de Grandin encouraged. "Your search has narrowed somewhat, for you need only include among your suspects those possessing genuine Turkish fezes 100 years or more old." "Yeah," commented Costello gloomily. "And after we've ran all them down, all we have to do is go down to the seashore and start counting the grains of sand." "Tiens, my friend, be not so downcast," de Grandin bowed. "Like your magnificent John Paul Jones, we have not yet commenced to fight. Come, Sergeant Trowbridge, let us to the morgue. Perhaps we shall discover something there, if the pig-clumsy physicians have not already spoiled matters with their autopsy knives. Balderson, mon brave, do you remain to guard that which requires watching. You have small stomach for the things friend Trowbridge and I shall shortly look upon." Side by side in the zinc-lined drawers of the city, morgue's refrigerator, lay the bodies of Kathleen Burke and Rachel Muller. De Grandin bent above the bodies, studying the discolorations on their throats in thoughtful silence. He commented, as he turned to me with a quizzical expression. "Is there not something these contusions have in common, friend Trowbridge?" Leaning forward, I examined the dark, purplish ridges banding both girls' throats. About the thickness of a lead pencil, they ran about the delicate white skins, 4 on the left side, 1 on the right, with a small circular patch of discoloration in the region of the larynx, showing where the strangler had rested the heel of his hand as a fulcrum for his grip. "Why?" I began, studying the marks carefully. I can't say that I know, by George, yes. The center finger of the throttler's hand was amputated at the second joint." "Precisement," the Frenchman agreed. "And which hand is it, if you please?" "The right, of course. See how his thumb pressed on the right side of his victim's throats." "Exactement. And that narrows Costello's search still more," I interrupted eagerly. "All he has to do now is search for someone with half the second finger of his right hand missing. And you do annoy me excessively," de Grandin cut in frigidly. "Your interruptions, they vex, they harass me. If I do not mistake rightly, we have already found him of the missing finger, at least, we have seen him." I looked at him in open-mouthed amazement. Men afflicted with mysterious sadistic impulses, I knew, might move in normal society for years without being subject to suspicion. But I could recall no one of our acquaintance who possessed the maimed hand, which was the killer's trademark. "You mean?" I asked blankly. "Last night or early this morning, mon vieux," he returned. "You, perhaps, were too immediately concerned with dodging exploding gases to take careful note of all we saw in the charnel chamber beneath the ground. But me, I see everything. The right middle finger of the skeleton we found in the coffin with the treasure was missing at the second joint." "You're joking," I shot back incredulously. For answer, he pointed silently to the still, dead forms before us. "Are these a joke, my friend?" he demanded. "Cordieu, if such they be, they are an exceedingly grim jest." "But for heaven's sake," I demanded, How could that skeleton leave its tomb and wander about the streets? Anyhow, Nurse Muller declared it was a man who attacked her, not a skeleton. And skeletons haven't eyes, yet poor little Kathleen spoke of her assailant's eyes the first thing we found her. He turned his back on my expostulations with a slight shrug and addressed himself to the morgue master. "Have they arrived at the precise causes of death, monsieur?" he asked. "Yes, sir," the official replied. "The little Burke girl died of heart failure consequent upon shock. Miss Muller died from loss of blood and—" "Never mind, my friend, it is enough," de Grandin interrupted. "Strangulation was present in both cases, but apparently was not the primary cause of either death. That was all I desired to learn." "Trowbridge, my friend," he assured me as we parted at the mortuary door. "He practices." "Practices who?" I demanded. But de Grandin was already out of earshot, walking down the street at a pace which would have qualified him for entry in a professional pedestrian's race. The consommé was growing cold in the tureen. Balderson and I were becoming increasingly aware of our appetites, and Nora McGuinness was on the verge of nervous prostration as visions of her elaborate dinner spoiling on the stove danced before her mind's eye when Jules de Grandin burst through the front door, a film of snowflakes from the raging storm outside decorating his shoulders like the ermine on a judge's gown. "Quick, friend Trowbridge," he ordered as he drew up his chair to the table. "Fill my plate to overflowing. I hunger, I starve, I famish. Not so much as one little crumb of luncheon has passed my lips this day." "Find out anything?" I asked as I ladled out a liberal portion of smoking chicken broth. "Cordieu, I shall say so, and he who denies it is a most foul liar," he returned with a grin. "Observe this, if you please." From his pocket, he produced an odd-looking object, something like a fork of dried weed or a root of desiccated ginger, handing it first to me, then to Eric Balderson for inspection. "All right, I'll bite. What is it?" Eric admitted as the little Frenchman eyed us in turn expectantly. "Mandragora officinalis, mandrake," he replied with another of his quick smiles. "Have you not seen it before?" I searched the pockets of my memory a moment. "Isn't this the thing we found on the old pirate's coffin last night?" "Exactly, precisely, quite so," he replied delightedly, patting his hands together softly as though applauding at a play. "You are right, good friend. But last night we were too much concerned with saving our silly heads from the swinging axe, with finding gold and gems and similar useless things to give attention to matters of real importance. Behold, my friends, with this bit of weed root and these, I shall make one Saker singe, a monkey no less, of that vile murderer who terrorizes the city and slays inoffensive young women in the night. Certainly." As he finished speaking, he thrust his hand into another pocket and brought forth a dozen small conical objects which he pitched onto the tablecloth with a dramatic gesture. "Bullets," Balderson remarked wonderingly. "What? Bullets, no less," de Grandin agreed, taking a pair of the little missiles into his hand and joggling them up and down playfully. "But not such bullets as you or friend Trowbridge have seen before. I bet me your life. Attend me. These are silver, solid silver, without a trace of alloy." "Eh bien, but I did have the fiend's own time finding a jeweller who would undertake to duplicate the bullets of my pistol in solid silver on such short notice. But at last, grace adieu, I found him, and he fashioned these so pretty things to my order and fitted them into the shells in place of the nickel-plated projectiles. For good measure, I ordered him to engrave each one with a cross at its tip, and then, on my way home, I did stop at the Church of St. Bernard and dip them each and every one into the font of Eau Bénite. Now I damn think we shall see what we shall see this night." "What in the world?" I began, but he shut me off with an upraised hand. "The roast, friend Trowbridge," he implored. "For dear friendship's sake, carve me a liberal portion of the roast and garnish it well with potatoes. Do but permit that I eat my fill, and, when the time arrives, I shall show you such things as to make you call yourself one colossal liar when you recall them to memory." Sergeant Costello, thoroughly disgruntled at hours of vigil in the snowy night and completely mystified, was waiting for us beside the entrance to St. David's churchyard. "Sure, Dr. de Grandin saw," he announced as he stepped from the shelter of the pentis, blowing on his numbed fingers. "'Tis the divil's own job ye gave me tonight. Me eyes have been skinned like a pair o' onions all the night long, but neither a bit o' anyone coming in or out of the graveyard have I seen." "Very good, my friend," de Grandin commented. "You have done most well, but I fear me one will attempt to pass you, and by the inward route, before many minutes have gone. You will kindly await our outcoming, if you please, and we shall be no longer than necessary, I assure you." Forcing the sliding door of the tombstone, we hastened down the stairway to the burial chamber in de Grandin's wake, sprung the guarding axe at the entrance of the first room, and crept into the inner cavern. One glance was sufficient to confirm our suspicions. The stone coffin was empty. Was it like this when you were here today?" I faltered. "No," de Grandin answered. "He lay in his bed as calmly as a babe in its cradle, my friend, but he lay on his side." "On his side? Why, that's impossible. The skeleton was on its back when we came here last night, and we didn't move it. How came the change of posture?" "Tiens, who can say?" he replied. "Perhaps he rests better that way." Of a certainty, he had lain long enough on his posterior to have become tired of it. "It may be." "Shh! Lights out! To your quarters!" Balderson and I rushed to opposite corners of the room, as de Grandin had previously directed, our powerful electric bull's-eye lanterns shut off, but ready to flood the place with light at a second's notice. De Grandin stationed himself squarely in line with the door, his head thrust forward, his knees slightly bent, his entire attitude one of pleased anticipation. What sixth sense had warned him of approaching danger I know not, for in the absolute quiet of the pitch-dark chamber I could hear no sound save the low, short breaths of my two companions and the faint trickle of water into the tank of the beheading machine which guarded the entrance of the farther room. I was about to speak when, bang! The muffled detonation of a shot fired somewhere above ground sounded startlingly, followed by another, and still another. Then the rasping, high-pitched cackle of a maniacal laugh, a scraping, shuffling step on the narrow stone stairs, and "Lights! Pour l'amour de Dieu! Lights!" De Grandin shrieked as some malign, invisible, untouchably wicked presence seemed suddenly to fill the chamber, staining the inky darkness still more black with its foul effluvium. As one man, Balderson and I snapped up the shutters of our lanterns, and the converging beams displayed a frightful tableau. Crouched at the low entrance of the cavern, like a predatory beast with its prey, was a fantastic figure, a broad, squat, almost humpbacked man arrayed in leathern jerkin, Turkish fez and loose, baggy pantaloons tucked into hip boots of soft Spanish leather. About his face, mask-like, was bound a black silk kerchief with two slits for eyes, and through the openings there glowed and glittered a pair of baleful orbs, green-glossed and vitreous, like those of a cat, but fiercer and more implacable than the eyes of any feline. Over one malformed shoulder, as a miller might carry a sack of meal, the creature bore the body of a girl, a slight, frail slip of femininity with ivory face and curling hair of deepest black. Her thin, frilly party dress ripped to tatters, one silver slipper fallen from her silk-sheathed foot, the silver tissue bandeau which bound her hair dislodged so that it lay half across her face like the bandage over the eyes of a condemned felon. "Monsieur le Pirate," de Grandin greeted in a low, even voice. "You do roam afield late, it seems. We have waited overlong for you." The mask above the visitant's face fluttered outward with the pressure of breath behind it, and we could trace the movement of jaws beneath the silk. But no word of answer came to the Frenchman's challenge. "Ah, so, you choose not to talk?" de Grandin queried sarcastically. Is it perhaps that you prefer deeds to words? C'est bien. With a quick skipping step, he advanced several paces toward the creature, raising his pistol as he moved. A peal of sardonic, tittering laughter issued from beneath the mask. Callous as a devil, the masked thing dropped the girl's lovely body to the stone floor, snatched at the heavy hanger in his belt, and leaped straight for de Grandin's throat. The Frenchman fired even as his antagonist charged, and the effect of his shot was instantaneous. As though he had run against a barrier of iron, the masked pirate stopped in mid-stride and staggered back an uncertain step. But de Grandin pressed his advantage. "Ha! You did not expect this, Hein?" he demanded with a smile which was more like a snarl. "You who defy the bullets of policemen and make mock of all human resistance thought you would add one more victim to your list. Ne sais pas, monsieur. Perhaps, monsieur le Morphelon, you had not thought of Jules de Grandin." As he spoke, he fired another shot into the cowering wretch, another, and still another, until 8 silver balls had pierced the cringing thing's breast. As the final shot went home, the fantastical, terrible shape began to change before our eyes. Like the cover of a punctured football, the gaudy, archaic costume began to wrinkle and wilt. The golden tasseled fez toppled forward above the masked face, and the black silk handkerchief itself dropped downward, revealing the unfleshed countenance of a grinning skull. "Up with him, my friends," de Grandin shouted. "Pitch him into his coffin. Clamp down the lid here. Lay the root of mandrake upon it. So, he is in again, and for all time. Now, one of you take up poor mademoiselle and pass her through the door to me." "Very well, Sergeant, we come. And bring the young lady with us," he cried, as Costello's heavy boots sounded raspingly on the stone steps outside. "Do not attempt to enter. It is death to put your head through the opening." A moment later, with the girl's body wrapped in the laprobe, we were driving toward my house, ignoring every speed regulation in the city ordinances. Sergeant Costello looked askance at the rug-wrapped form occupying the rear seat of my car. "Say, Dr. de Grandin saw," he ventured with another sidewise glance at the lovely body. "Hadn't we best be notifying the coroner?" And he gulped over the word. "And gettin' an undertaker for this here poor young lady." "Coroner, undertaker? Abasse les croque-morts. Your wits are entirely absent, harvesting the wool of sheep, cher sergeant. The only undertaker of which she stands in need is the excellent Nora McGuinness, who shall give her a warm bath to overcome her chill after friend Trowbridge, and I have administered stimulants. Then, unless I mistake much, we shall listen to a most remarkable tale of adventure before we restore her to the arms of her family." Half an hour later, our fair prize, revived by liberal doses of aromatic ammonia and brandy, thoroughly warmed by a hot sponge and alcohol rub, administered by the competent Nora, and with one of de Grandin's vivid flowered silk dressing gowns slipped over the sorry remnants of her tattered party costume, sat demurely before our library fire. As she entered the room, Eric Balderson, who had not seen her face before, because of the bandeau which obscured it in the cave, gave a noticeable start, then seemed to shrink back in his corner of the ingle nook. Not so Jules de Grandin. Swinging one well-tailored leg across the corner of the library table, he regarded the young lady with a level, unblinking stare till the sustained scrutiny became embarrassing. Finally, "Mademoiselle, you will have the kindness to tell us exactly what has happened to you this night, so far as you can remember," he ordered. The girl eyed him with a tremulous smile a moment, then, taking a deep breath, launched on her recital like a child speaking a piece in school. "I'm Marion Warner," she told us. "We live in Tunlaw Street, I think. Dr. Trowbridge knows my father, Fabian Warner." I nodded agreement, and she continued. "Tonight, I went to a Christmas Eve party at Mr. and Mrs. Partridge's. It was a masquerade affair, but I just wore a domino over my evening dress, since we were to unmask at midnight anyway, and I thought I'd feel more comfortable in citizen's clothes than I would dancing in some sort of elaborate costume. There wasn't anything unusual about the party, or about the first part of the evening, that I remember, except, of course, everyone was talking about the mysterious murder of those two poor women. They danced a German just before midnight, and I was pretty hot from the running around, so I stepped into the conservatory to slip out of my domino a moment and cool off. I'd just taken the gown off when I felt a touch on my arm, and turning round, found a man staring into my face. I thought he must be one of the guests, of course, though I couldn't remember having seen him. He wore a jerkin of bright red leather with a wide black belt about his waist, a red fez with gold and black tassel, and loose trousers tucked into tall boots. His face was concealed with a black silk handkerchief instead of a regular mask, and somehow there was something menacing and terrifying about him. I think it must have been his eyes, which glittered in the light like those of an animal at night. I started back from him, but he edged after me, extending his hand to stroke my arm and almost fawning on me. He made queer, inarticulate sounds in his throat too. "Go away," I told him. "I don't know you and I don't want to. Please leave me alone." By that time he'd managed to crowd me into a corner so that my retreat into the house was cut off, and I was getting really frightened. "If you don't let me go, I'll scream," I threatened. And then, before I had a chance to say another word, out shot one of his hands. Ugh! They were big and thin and long, like a gorilla's, and grasped me by the throat. I tried to fight him off, and even as I did so there flashed through my mind the description Miss Muller gave of her murderer. Then I knew. I was helpless in the grasp of the killer. That's all I remember, till I regained consciousness with Dr. Trowbridge's housekeeper, drying me after my bath, and you gentlemen standing outside the door, ready to help me downstairs. Did they catch him, the murderer? She added with true feminine curiosity. But of course, mademoiselle, de Grandin assured her gravely. I was on his trail. It was impossible he should escape. "Attend me, my friends," he ordered, slipping from his seat on the table and striding to the center of the room like a lecturer about to begin his discourse. "Last night, when we entered that accursed tomb, I had too many thoughts within my so small brain to give full attention to any one of them. In my hurry, I did overlook many important matters. That root of mandrake, by example, I should have suspected its significance, but I did not. Instead, I tossed it away as an unconsidered trifle. Mandrake, or mandragora, my friends, was one of the most potent charm drugs in the ancient pharmacopoeia. With it, the barren might be rendered fecund, love forgotten might be reawakened, deep and lasting coma might be induced by it. Does not that Monsieur Shakespeare make Cleopatra say, "Give me to drink of mandragora, that I might sleep out this great gap of time my Antony is away, most certainly"? Moreover, it had another and less frequent use. Placed upon the grave of one guilty of manifold sins, it would serve to keep his earthbound spirit from walking. You perceive the connection. When we cast aside that root of mandragora, we did unseal a tomb which was much better left unopened, and did release upon the world a spirit capable of working monstrous evil. Yes, this Black Master, I do know him, friend Trowbridge. When we looked upon the poor remains of those slain women, I noticed at once the peculiarity of the bruises on their throats. Parbleu, I say to myself, the skeleton which we saw last night, he had a hand so maimed as to leave a mark like this. Jules de Grandin, we must investigate. Make it so, I replied to myself in that mental conversation. And so, friend Trowbridge, when I left you I did repair instantly to that cursed tomb and looked about. There, in his coffin of stone, lay the skeleton of the Black Master, but as I have already been at pains to tell you, on his side, not as we left him lying the night before. Mordieu, this is not good, this is most badly strange, I inform myself. Then I look about and discover the bit of mandrake root, all shriveled and dried, and carelessly tossed to one side, where we left it when friend Trowbridge let fall his light. Aye. By the way, de Grandin, I put in, something hit me a paralyzing blow on the knuckles before I let my flashlight fall. Have you any idea what it was? He favored me with a momentary frown then. But certainly, he responded. "It was a bit of stone." "From the ceiling. I saw it detach itself and cried a warning to you, even as it fell, but the loss of our light was of such importance that I talked no more about your injury. Now, to resume, can we not now seal him in the tomb with the mandrake once more? I ask myself as I stand beside that coffin today, but better judgment tells me not to attempt it. This old-time sea devil, he has been able to clothe his bony frame with seeming habiliments of the flesh. He is, to all intents and purposes, once more alive, and twice as wicked as before, on account of his long sleep. I shall kill his phantasmal body for good and all before I lock him once and forever in the tomb again. But how shall we slay him so that he be really truly dead? I ask myself. Then, standing beside the coffin of that old wicked pirate, I think and think deeply. How are the werewolves and witches, the wizards and the warlocks, the bugbears and goblins of ancient times slain in the olden days? I ask, and the answer comes back, with bullets of silver. Attend me, my friends. Snatching a red leather volume from the nearby shelf, he thumbed quickly through its pages. Hear what your Monsieur Whittier says in one of his so lovely poems. In the olden times, the garrison of a New England fort was beset by a spectral host, defying stroke of steel and aim of gun. Never yet was ball to slay them in the mould of mortals run. Midnight came. From out the forest moved a dusky mass that soon grew to warriors plumed and painted, grimly marching in the moon. Ghosts or witches, said the captain, thus I foil the evil one. And he rammed a silver button from his doublet down his gun. Very good. I too will thus foil the evil one and his servant, who once more walks the earth. I have told you how I had the bullets made to my order this day. I have recounted how I baptized them for the work they were to do this night. Yourselves saw how the countercharm worked against that servitor of Satan, how it surprised him when it pierced his phantom breast, how it made of him a true corpse, and how the seeming flesh he had assumed to clothe his bare bones while he worked his evil was made to melt away before the bullets of Jules de Grandin. Now, doubly dead, he lies sealed by the mandrake root within his tomb forevermore. Friend Balderson, you have been most courteously quiet this long time. Is there no question you would care to ask? You told Dr. Trowbridge you knew the Black Master, Eric replied. Can you tell us something about him? Ah, parbleu, but I can, de Grandin interrupted. This afternoon, while the excellent jeweler was turning out my bullets, I repaired to the public library and discovered much of that old villain's life and deeds. Who he was, nobody seems to know. As to what he was, there is much fairly accurate conjecture. A Turk he was by birth, it is generally believed, and a most unsavory follower of the false prophet. Even in sinful Stamboul, his sins were so great that he was deprived of his tongue by way of punishment. Also, he was subjected to another operation not wholly unknown in Eastern countries. This latter, instead of rendering him docile, seemed to make a veritable demon of him. Never would he permit his crews to take prisoners, even for ransom. Sexless himself, he forbade the presence of women, even drabs from Maracaibo and Panama, aboard his ships, save for one purpose. That was torture. Whenever a ship was captured, he fetched the female prisoners aboard, and after compelling them to witness the slaughter of their menfolk, with his own hands he put them to death, often crushing life from their throats with his maimed right hand. Does not his history fit squarely with the things we have observed these last 2 nights? The accounts declare the time and place of his death are uncertain, but it is thought he died somewhere near the present city of Newark and was buried somewhere in Jersey. A vast treasure disappeared with him, and speculation concerning its hiding place rivals that of the famous buried hoard of Captain Kidd. Now, it is entirely probable that we might add something of great interest to that chronicle, but I do not think we shall, for, absorbed in the Frenchman's animated narrative, Eric Balderson had moved from his shadowed corner into the zone of light cast by the reading lamp, and as de Grandin was about to finish, Marion Warner interrupted him with a little cry of incredulous delight. "Eric," she called. "Eric Balderson. Oh, my dear, I've wondered and worried so much about you." A moment later she had flown across the room, shedding de Grandin's purple lizard-skin slippers as she ran, put both hands on the young man's shoulders, and demanded, "Why did you go away, dear? Didn't you know?" "Marion," Eric interrupted hoarsely, "I didn't dare ask your father. I was so wretchedly poor, and there seemed no prospect of my ever getting anywhere. You'd been used to everything, and I thought it would be better for us both if I just faded out of the picture. But," he laughed boyishly, "I'm rich now, dear, one of the richest men in the country, and—" "Rich or poor, Eric dear, I love you," the girl interrupted as she slipped both arms about his neck and kissed him on the lips. Jules de Grandin's arms shot out like the blades of a pair of opening shears. With one hand he grasped Sergeant Costello's arm, the other snatched me by the elbow. "Come away, foolish ones," he hissed. "What have we, who left our loves in Avalon long years ago, to do with such as they? Pardieu, to them we are a curse, a pest, an abomination. We do encumber the earth. Await me here," he ordered as we concluded our march to the consulting room. "I go, but I return immediately." In a moment he came tripping down the stairs, a magnificent glowing ruby, nearly as large as a robin's egg, held daintily between his thumb and forefinger. "For their betrothal ring," he announced proudly. "See, it is the finest in my collection. Howly mither Dr. de Grandin saw a ye a ginny from the Arabian Nights. To be passing out jewels like that whenever a pair of young folks gets engaged?" demanded Sergeant Costello, his big blue eyes almost popping from his head in amazement. "Ah, mon sergent." The little Frenchman turned one of his quick, elfish smiles on the big Irishman. "You have as yet seen nothing. Before you leave this house tonight, friend Trowbridge and I shall fill every pocket of your clothes to overflowing with golden coin from old Spain. But ere we do so, let us remember it is Christmas." With the certainty of one following a well-worn path, he marched to the medicine closet, extracted a bottle of peach brandy and 3 glasses, and filled them to the brim. "To your very good and long-lasting health, my friend," he pledged, raising his glass aloft. "Joyeux." End of The Black Master by Seabury Quinn.